Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Psycast Expanded. For starters, you'll need to own the Royalty DLC and the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework and Harmony. As there are multiple additional psycasting trees released individually or included as part of larger mods, this rundown is simply going to focus on the core Psycast Expanded experience to try and provide the most understandable overview. Alright folks, we've already gone over Empire and Deserter factions in previous videos, as well as covering Tribals and Archons, which both benefit from Psycasting. It's time to bite the bullet and do this absolute monster of a mod. Let's be real for a second. I'm not going to sit here and list off every single exact value of every single Psycast from every single tree, and show precise examples of how all of them work in every single situation. The video would be 4 hours long, and you'd have totally zoned out after the first 10 minutes of just numbers. You've got around 150 fairly unique Psycasts to play with, which we'll cover and briefly show examples of the ones that are cool or different enough to warrant further explanation. This is up from the base game's 29 potential casts, which are all pretty tame in comparison. And it isn't just Psycasts that this mod includes either. You've got Eltex, a highly sought after material with new gear that can be crafted from it. There is a new raid type, a new storyteller, and an entire overhaul to the very foundation of Psycasting as a system. Before we dig into any of that, let me start by saying something potentially controversial, which will inevitably kill my average view time and get this video some dislikes. Is Psycast Expanded fun? Yes, obviously. Otherwise I'd have no interest in making a video of this length on it. Will Psycast Expanded enhance your game? If you leave the values as default, as far as I'm concerned, no. So hear me out. In the mod settings for Psycast Expanded, you've got an option at the top, Psycaster XP per Psyfocus percentage gained. By default this sits at 1. Crank it down, right down. 0.1 is as low as it'll go. What does it mean? I haven't explained any of the mechanics of this mod and now I'm telling you to change settings. Why? Normally with Psycasting in Vanilla Royalty, you will only earn additional levels with bestowing ceremonies, the Animatree ceremony, or using a Psylink Neuroformer. In Psycast Expanded, simply meditating to restore your Psyfocus will passively earn casters experience towards their next Psy level. If you're casting frequently, which means you'll be meditating more to top that bar up, you can very quickly acquire new levels on Psycasters, which is great, right? Well, yes and no. The Psycasts in Expanded are more impactful. Casters are strong. Wipe out entire 200-man raids by themselves and save entire runs from ending kind of strong. If your casters passively level, even at a rate of 1 XP per 1%, which is the default, you will breeze the first 3 or 4 levels and then each run becomes less about the colony and more about having to have that Psycast again. You spend most of your time micromanaging that one pawn, and everybody else ends up feeling like a background character to this god, essentially.
You can't defeat me.
No, I know. But he can.
I know the first rule of Rimworld is you don't tell other people how to play. It's a sandbox game first and foremost. Do whatever you want, just have fun. But, as a long-time player who used this mod extensively, if you do not self-moderate with it and limit what you can do, it will become the focus of the majority of your colonies, and it will strip a lot of the enjoyment from other systems because it trivializes them. If you want to keep these powers feeling special and impactful, do yourself a favour and make them harder to obtain. Anyway, enough opinion nonsense, we're here for a rundown. Easy bits first. The new storyteller is Basilicus Bestower, and he loves Psycasts, so much that every single pawn in the game has a 10% chance of being a Psycaster by default. Besides that, he's pretty much a classic approach to the game, nice and simple. You have a new couple of events with Psycast Expanded, one of them being the new raid type that includes a Psycaster. As only Imperials and Tribals by default can be Psycasters, unless you're actively pissing off the Empire, chances are this raid type will ramp up the danger of your Tribal raids, which alters the approach in a really cool way at times. Without using mods like Ignorance is Bliss, you'll always be fair game for all different kinds of raid in Rimworld. A tribal Psycaster raid will dramatically lower the number of raiders, but include the far more devastating enemy Psycasters, and they're costed a lot higher in terms of raid points. They'll give no indication to you as to their potential abilities until they start slinging them, pretty much dooming you all. This turns those, "oh no, not another 200 tribals, I still haven't cleaned up the last pile of corpses," moments into a, "oh crap, where's the caster? Can anyone see the caster?" as you desperately try to down or kill them before they get a single ability off. The other event type can either happen on your own map or on the overworld, requiring a caravan trip to visit, and it's the Eltex Meteor. Much like a normal meteorite landing, a large cluster of mineable Eltex is created for you to gather. Just remember to bring a caravan animal or two along if you want to travel to gather it. The last thing you want to do is spend all of that time mining, only to have to abandon half of it so you can actually move home. Wait, Eltex? What? That's the new resource included in Psycast Expanded, and unfortunately for you, the Empire wants control over it. This means if you happen to mine it, congratulations, you are allowed to keep it. But if you want to sell it,
that's a peddling.
The Empire don't take kindly to you dishing out Eltex to whoever you see fit. They'd much rather that you donate it to them at a rate of 4 chunks per 1 honour when the yearly tribute collector rolls around. If word manages to get back to the Empire that you have been selling Eltex to other factions,
ooh, you better believe that's a peddling.
Expect some quite serious diplomatic consequences. So we can't sell Eltex, and we don't always want to give it to the Imperial bellends either. What choice do we have left? Fear not, you can use it to craft prestige versions of Recon, Marine and Cataphract armour. Just remember that because you put the Eltex into a bit of gear, it doesn't magically not exist anymore. Selling prestige equipment or anything constructed using Eltex also runs the risk of angering the Empire. They're always watching, and they do not approve of you removing this extremely expensive equipment from your tile for profit. Seriously, if you want to get rid of this stuff without angering the Empire, the only real way to do it is to caravan a single tile away and throw it in some bushes. If you're at a difficulty where wealth management really matters, prestige gear is a hell of a burden before you've hit the late game. As well as Eltex now being a requirement to create prestige gear, you've now also got access to make the previously uncraftable parts of Eltex equipment via Eltex Gear Research, which is quite high on the tech tree. So robes, shirts, vests, helmets, skullcaps and the staff are all available for you to build yourself.
But wait! There's more!
You've now also got additional Eltex equipment you can craft, available at a much lower tech point. Caster gear grants you access to Eltex masks, capes, daggers, maces, swords, and a prestige plate armour for all of your tribal or medieval needs. As with any equipment designed for Psycasters, you're not using these pieces for their defensive or offensive potential. It's purely about pumping up the psychic sensitivity numbers, as standard gear will always provide more reliable stats with a cheaper price point. It may however be useful to keep some of this equipment at hand for an out-of-combat cast that scales well with sensitivity. Maybe a crop burst or a tree sprout for the Wildspeaker school of casting? But I'm getting ahead of myself again. If we're going to talk about abilities, it's time to cover the Psycasting UI, the new focus types, and then all of the potential schools that you can choose from. The new Psycasting UI actually isn't as complicated as it may first look. Yes, there's a lot of words, numbers, and buttons thrown at you, but for the most part there are 3 options here. Firstly, you can see your Psycaster level, as well as the experience required to advance a level naturally through meditation. This is what I said at the top of the video to turn down. Generally speaking, my Psycasters will naturally gain a level about every 2 years if they don't cast that often, maybe every 90 days if they're frequently emptying their entire Psyfocus bar. Whilst to some people, I'm sure this sounds like it takes forever, they still gain levels using the anima tree, advancing via royalty or administering neuroformers. All of that means that you're more incentivized to invest these rituals or items into specific pawns, to make a conscious choice to make them stronger. With the default XP from meditation, you'll find that you can easily turn everyone in your colony into a level 1 Psycaster, and within a year or so, they'll be more than capable of casting half of an entire path worth of abilities. Personally, I just find that too much. every single fight becomes this micromanagement pause fiesta of throwing out abilities, and your weapons, gear, and defensive positions slowly matter less and less, to the point that unless you have the world's worst luck with some kind of drop pod raid, you're basically never going to die. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked again. That's the experience bar. Remember, use 0.1 gain speed, earn your levels the old-fashioned way. The next batch of stats with the big upgrade button are your core psycasting functions, and the option to improve them rather than unlocking a new ability. Personally, I enjoy keeping my pawns limited to unlocking and learning from one path. Yes, even more self-moderation on my part when I use this mod. I find that it makes me appreciate a pawn's journey and story more if they unlock a psycasting path that is relevant to their background or passions. Maybe they've already had a particularly eventful story and you want to further that by using psycasts that seem related to their trauma or heroics. That means that once you fully unlock the path's ability tree, the upgrade button is there to help with any remaining points. It'll boost your neural heat limit, recovery rate, sensitivity, psi-focus gain, and even lower the psi-focus cost of your abilities, all in one handy click. Now, let's say in some bizarre situation you've made it all the way to this part of the video and you don't actually know what psycasting stats are. Maybe you don't own royalty, but just really like this series. If that's you, thanks for the support. I'm sure all of these words I used just sounded like white noise to you though. So, neural heat is accumulated when your pawn casts, with the recovery rate being how fast their brain cools down. You can overclock your pawn, as it were, and allow them to break their neural heat limits, but this risks pushing the pawn into a psychic breakdown, which has 3 stages of severity. Minor, causing a minus 25% consciousness for up to 5 days, major, causing minus 50% consciousness for up to 10 days, and total, which will drop your pawn to a max 10% consciousness, or, a state of unconsciousness, for potentially 15 days. Don't forget that as unconsciousness sets your pawn to a max of 10%, any pre-existing conditions on the pawn that lowers consciousness by a flat percentage, or active drug effects or even withdrawals, may actually make them drop below 0% consciousness and cause an instant death. You have been warned. Giving a pawn a nosebleed to throw another fireball is all fun and games, until you find their brain melting out of their ears and you have to bury them next to the rice fields. They made a better fighter than they do fertilizer.
This is the first time I've ever used my power to help someone. It's strange. It feels kind of...
Psychic sensitivity manages everything related to psychic effects, from drones to soothes to psycasts. This is why psychically deaf pawns can pose some risks to a psycaster. That part of their brain that should respond to neural stimulation is totally smooth, like an entire generation that's been raised on TikTok videos with Subway Surfer footage underneath and an AI voice explaining how to make a sandwich in the background. Just an attention span that is so totally fried that trying to make any kind of connection with their mind is impossible. This does mean, of course, that certain pawns are hypersensitive, a snowflake, if you will. Even looking in their direction as a psycaster will cause them to have a mental break and complain about it on Tumblr. You've got meditation gain rate, which, unsurprisingly, affects how much psi-focus you can gain per day, but more on that in a second when we talk about meditation focuses. And finally, you have the psi-focused cost multiplier, which is more beneficial for some paths than others. While certain psycasts may be extremely expensive on stored psi-focus, meaning you can only cast it once or twice a day, others have practically trivial costs but are balanced around a high heat accumulation. This percentage reduction balances out the bonus that heat-based casters get with higher neural heat capacity and cooldown speed against a focus-based caster which have costly abilities, so one doesn't necessarily outclass the other. The next part of the UI is focus types, which determines where a pawn can meditate. Some types are locked to backgrounds, with natural only being available to tribal pawns and dignified requiring an association with royalty. You still have morbid, artistic, minimalistic, and flame, which were all present in base game royalty. As well as those, you now also have group focus, which gets stronger with more casters meditating together. Archotechnology focus, which is boosted when surrounded by Architect artifacts like shock lances or Architect limbs, if you're happy to just have them lying around rather than installing or using them. Science Focus, which can be boosted by meditating near a high research speed bench. And Wealth Focus, which lost over 70% of its value after it was rebranded to X Focus. Fortunately, you won't need to poorly build a rocket or car to meditate with this, you'll just want a stack of expensive materials. The more wealth, the better. The new thing that Psycast Expanded brings is multi-focus meditation, and believe me, you'll know when it's scheduled meditation time in your colony if you use this because of the amount of ticks that will just disappear. I mentioned in the upgrade stats bit about meditation gain rate, so let's say you gain 28% natural meditation from using the anima tree. That is one type. You could also unlock Morbid and throw 4 graves around the anima tree. They do count as natural buildings, so they won't upset it, and that will be another meditation focus for you. You could take Flame too, build 4 torch lamps. They are still natural, so they are still not upsetting the tree. That's even more percentage. Now take group focus on all of your Psycasters and make the entire colony come together for morning meditation for another huge bonus to Psy-Focus gain. What was originally a procedure that would have taken a few days to complete, i.e. refilling your Psy-Focus bar, can now be achieved in just a couple of hours. And yes, if you want to go a different route, you could put art in your lab and fill the place with gold and silver, or have all of your royals meditate in the throne room that stores all of your architect gear. Whatever it takes to stack these bonuses up. Bear in mind, of course, each focus type you unlock is an ability choice that you are passing up, so you probably want some actual abilities first before you make use of the insanely fast meditation. Otherwise, that 100% Psy-Focus is going to be hard to use with no actual casts. Alright, the part you're actually waiting for, the Psycasts themselves. Since Psycast Expanded was patched and rebalanced recently, you're given 2 points to spend when you first become a Psycaster, which allows you to open one path of your choice and gain a level 1 ability from it. I'll put what tree we're talking about in the top left of this video, as this section is about to be a whole lot of words. You aren't limited to only picking one tree. You can take as many different abilities from as many different trees as you would like. I, however, do enjoy keeping a Psycaster limited to the original tree they unlock. Let's start with the background specific trees first. There is one tree locked to a royal background and another to tribal, so we'll start with the Imperial Archotechist. The Archotechist will have some familiar Psycasts if you've already used royalty, with Burden and Stun at level 1, which are both present in vanilla Psycasting. Between the choices of a full stun or a slow, it's fairly obvious that the stun is a better choice here, allowing you to utterly bully whoever you throw it on. Going forwards, it's also safe to assume that unless I state otherwise, if a Psycast can be cast offensively, other factions will take offense to you using it against them. There are maybe a couple of exceptions that allow you to do some silly bollocks shenanigans, but for the most part, people are wise to your Jedi mind tricks. At level 2, you have Psychic Shock and Neural Heat Dump. Yes, that Neural Heat Dump from vanilla royalty. The only ever use I found for this skill is a get down Mr. President on a pawn that you're worried will die if they stay standing and take another hit. If somehow a kid has found their way onto the front lines or a genie is waltzing around amid gunfire, it is a super niche ability to use in these circumstances. Psychic Shock is the effect of a shock lance on demand, with the risk of brain damage too. It can be useful if you want to make a happy potato for your base though. On to level 3, and you've got Berserk, another vanilla skill, and Aggressive Heat Dump, which has the most unfortunate tooltip going. I can't not see it as an illustration in a book that was handed around during a sex ed class. Can't just be me, right? Berserk, as always, is handy to have around, allowing you to turn enemies against their own, ruining their positioning, disrupting their lines, and giving you a chance to go on the offensive or fall back. Aggressive Heat Dump is what Neural Heat Dump should have been, turning your accumulated heat into a bomb that can be planted inside an enemy. Awesome to disrupt a cluster of enemies that have made it into your kill corridor. At level 4, you have Berserk Pulse, Psychic Drone, and Neural Heat Detonation. Now we're getting powerful. Berserk Pulse is the same as vanilla, an AoE Berserk cast that ruins an enemy raid's day. Ideal if you see them carrying in something like a rocket launcher or grenades, anything that you'd rather they throw at their friends instead of you. Psychic Drone is fortunately only tuned to hostiles. Unfortunately, you kind of need a stationary raid to happen for this to be much use. It increases the likelihood of breaks in enemy pawns whilst they're waiting to attack, and can lead to infighting or wanders that may weaken the strike force somewhat. Neural Heat Detonation is a targetless aggressive heat dump, meaning you can pinpoint where you want to blow the ever-loving crap out of. Absolutely ideal to trigger chain explosions or just ruin a particular group's day. With level 5 you have Neuroquake. Yep, the same Neuroquake from vanilla, but in all honesty, why change it? This is an I win button against any human raid, with the consequence being you need to fling some gifts to your neighbours to say sorry for scrambling your brain a little. If you're a cannibal colony, all of the human leather you gain from butchering the leftover raid bodies is more than adequate. Casting this is usually safe with most storytellers too, as few of them are throwing huge raids your way frequently enough that a caster won't have recovered from the 5-day coma. Next up, you've got Wildspeaker, which is limited to the tribal backstory. You'll know if your pawn is a tribal, as they will also have the natural meditation focus, as they are capable of communing with the anima tree. For their level 1 cast, they have Bramble Maze, which is every bit as totally uninteresting as it sounds. The brambles don't do damage, they just take a little while to pop up, so you need to aim the cast ahead of the approaching enemy, and unfortunately it barely slows them down. If anything, it just makes them do a little shimmy around to avoid the worst of the patch, but it's all you can take at level 1, so enjoy, I guess. At level 2, now you're starting to get something cool. Crop Burst. This causes the earth to spring to life in a small radius and starts random crops growing where it was cast. It may be food, it could be dye. If you've got a whole bunch of additional plant mods on, it could be literally anything. The higher your psychic sensitivity, the more growth percentage the crops start with. Just bear in mind that weather and temperature still very much matter. If you try and use this in a minus 20 degrees C biome, the crops will instantly die. Equally, this is looking for fertile ground. It can't magically make potatoes grow on rock surfaces. On to level 3, and you've got Manhunter Pulse, Word of Animals, and Tree Sprout. Manhunter Pulse is an AoE cast, not a map wide like an animal pulsar, but it does allow you to turn any nearby beasties against enemy raiders. Awesomely fun if you have the Pillage raid from Vikings enabled, as you can turn the wolfhounds they bring against them immediately. Also really useful to get you strong leathers like rhino or elephant hide by letting the raiders soften them up a bit for you first. You can also cast it on caravan animals to force them to attack their masters and likely be killed, dropping their goods. Whilst not something that will instantly turn a faction hostile to you, you will lose relations for every member and animal that is killed by doing this, so chances are you'll need to gift most of the caravan goods back to them to make reparations. Word of Animals can be used to calm those that you have just turned Manhunter, or to try and tame a calm animal. Much like trying to tame an animal the normal way, this can backfire and cause the animal to try and savage you. Tree Sprout is what you'd expect, like Crop Sprout but for wood, and they come in fully grown. Yep, just summon some fully grown trees instantly. At level 4, you get some interesting twists. You have Shield Animals, Animal Allies, and Shrine Shield. Shield Animals surrounds all nearby colony animals with the same effect as a low shield, rendering them immune to ranged attacks. Amazingly beneficial if you've got a Megasloth or Thrumbo that are defending your gates, as normally they're such massive targets that bullets don't miss. This allows them to stay in the thick of it and really stack up a kill streak. Animal Allies is a safer Manhunter Pulse, turning all affected animals into a territorial Manhunter, which means they don't go for your colonists, only folks that smell like an outsider. Shrine Shield puts a really unique twist on an otherwise unremarkable structure, allowing you to repurpose nature shrines around the base into skip shields, which entirely block mortars and gunfire, both entering and exiting. You can get quite crafty with this and secure weak spots around your walls, or just shrine your entire defensive perimeter and never worry about mortar shells ever again. 10 out of 10. Awesome flavour for this path. And finally at level 5 you have Essence Transfer and Summon Pack. Essence Transfer is a hallmark movie in the form of a Psycast. You bind another pawn to a colony animal. If the pawn dies while the colony animal is still alive, it goes to their side, lays down, and brings them back to life at the cost of its own.
Oh no! Something terrible has happened.
There will be no dry eyes left in this house. You don't necessarily have to do it with, well, nice, cute, fluffy animals either. You could quite happily keep a cave full of waste rats all linked to colony pawns away from any potential danger, just living in a cloud of their own farts. It'll still do the job. Summon Pack is great if you have no animals left on your map to use as manhunting allies, as it'll bring in outside help to deal with the threat. Absolutely invaluable on certain tiles if you struggle to hunt for meat and leather, as this delivers it right to your doorstep. This is fairly reliant on psychic sensitivity to get the best results, so make sure to throw on any gear you have to boost it before casting this and going into a short coma. The paths mentioned after this point don't have any background requirement and can be unlocked by any Psycaster. Archon has a couple of familiar casts that you may have used with vanilla Psycasts, with a few new useful additions. With level 1, Word of Trust is the same as normal. A simple cast that lowers prisoners' resistance. Just remember that if you're using ideology, this only helps with recruitment. You still need to convert someone to your way of thinking, unless you enjoy juggling multiple ideological views in your colony. At level 2, you have Word of Productivity and Blinding Pulse. Word of Productivity, despite being a buff, is classed as a hostile action if you use it on a visitor or a guest, so be very careful about upsetting other factions unintentionally. It applies a nice 25% global work speed buff at the cost of increasing hunger to 125%. So obviously be very careful about using this on genetically modified pawns that already have a garbage metabolic rate. They'll pretty much just spend all day eating and never make use of the work speed buff.
What do you want? His cholesterol's through the roof.
Blinding Pulse is the same as vanilla. A nice easy debuff to enemy combat capabilities by scrambling the visual processing part of their brain for a while. At level 3, you get some new, awesome interactions for the Archon tree. Word of Alliance, Group Link, and Word of Pain. Word of Alliance is a relations boost on demand. It's always worth keeping your caster at around 60% focus so you can drop this on a caravan or visitor, aiming for the highest psychic sensitivity member of the group possible, shown when you hover the cast over them. Once you've got a few allies in the world, it becomes less relevant, but early game it is crazy useful to get on the right side of people. Group Link turns a Word of cast into an AoE, which can make a couple of the buffs in the Archon tree extremely easy to keep active at all times on the entire colony, such as allowing your colony to work at 125% global work speed by pairing this with Word of Productivity and bringing everyone together once every few days to top it back up. Word of Pain is a useful skill to more reliably drop fleeing prisoners without potentially killing them, or to try and take a raider alive by hitting their pain threshold rather than their damage limit in combat. You can also try and snap pawns out of annoying mental breaks before they do too much damage, like using this to break up a social fight. With level 4, you can unlock Mindbreak and Word of Protection. Mindbreak is, unique. It can turn any pawn into a happy little jelly bean that does what they're told, with a huge diplomatic consequence if you use it on someone that isn't already hostile. It does also work on unwaveringly loyal pawns too. It will immediately recruit the pawn and give them the Thrall trait, which makes them incapable of skilled labour and social tasks, so ideally you want to cast this on someone with good shooting, melee, animals, art, medical or intellectual, as those jobs can still be performed. A Thrall will also retain their other traits, so tough, jogger, hard worker, etc. These are all highly valued. The biggest buff is the permanent plus 100 mood that they receive, as the brain is essentially jelly at this point, making them absolutely perfect choices for a psychic harmonizer. Word of Protection is another buff that works fantastically alongside Group Link, allowing you to prepare for combat by giving everyone affected a 50% incoming damage reduction. Yes, this buff is basically tough on demand, and yes, it stacks with other damage reductions. Absolutely bonkers strong, ensuring that pretty much everything besides the most savage of attacks won't pose the risk of an insta-kill. And finally, at level 5, you have Drained Psi Essence and Mass Hallucination. Now, I don't want to sound too down on the top tier Archon casts, but these suck. They're different for sure, but Drained Psi Essence feels like an absolutely mad choice to make, because you have to cast it on a downed Psycaster. They are downed. Capture them. Turning them into a Psi Essence smoothie and absorbing their very being to level up your own caster is madness, especially when it has such dire consequences to global relations. Equally, Mass Hallucination is a really cool idea of a cast, giving all pawns affected by it the top tier buffs for any rooms that they visit. Bedrooms, dining rooms, rec rooms. But this is a top tier cast. You already likely have that without needing to brainwash people into believing it. Not only that, but it's also going to knock your Archon on their ass, so you might not have them around to cast the far more beneficial and powerful AoE protection buff if you get raided. Big oof. Chronopath is the next choice, and it's definitely one of my favourites. It involves using an additional currency, as it were, to cast, in the form of a pawn's age. I wish this was something that tied more into other paths in this mod, absorbing fire for Conflag, having positive interactions for Empath, spending time in total darkness for Nightstalker. I entirely get why it isn't a mechanic, it'd be a nightmare to work with, but Chronopath has so much more flavour as a choice of Psycasting path. At level 1, you have Plant Time Skip Meditation, and Word of Foretelling. Plant Time Skip is different to the Wildspeaker's Crop Burst in that it accelerates the growth of plants already in the ground, in a small radius around the caster. It also adds 1 year to the caster. Time Skip Meditation is something you'll use when your caster is still green, as it earns you considerably more benefits early game, granting a large chunk of Psycasting experience, but putting the caster into the coma, and aging them 5 years. Word of Foretelling is a bunch of different words all smashed together. It can inspire colony pawns, improve relations with visitors, break prisoners' resistance, or cause enemies to flee. Due to its versatility and strength, it will also age the caster 1 year with every use. Level 2 is when things get really fun. You have Craft Time Skip and Age. Craft Time Skip is perfect for those items that need thousands of work to complete, like full power armor or charge weaponry. Just make sure that the person who authored the item has the highest crafting skill, as it pulls from their expertise to determine the quality. Age is when a Chronopath really starts in earnest. It de-ages the caster 2 years by siphoning 10 years of life essence from the target. This gives a solid use to those prisoners with rubbish passions or useless traits. Borrow an organ or two from them and then use them as a lovely organic battery to recharge your Chronopath. There isn't really a level 3 for this tree, it just jumps straight to level 4, which sees you unlock Raid Pause or Season Time Skip. Raid Pause is fantastic to give you time to man the mortars, but it won't give you long enough to really set up some stupid shenanigans, so it's fairly well balanced in that regard. If any of the paused raiders take even a single breath of damage, it'll immediately break the effect and they'll carry on as normal. Season Time Skip is exactly what it sounds like. Bored of winter? Make it spring. It'll age the caster 1 year, as is standard for this path. There is also this extremely useful interaction to accelerate through refugee aid quests, or colonist lending, or visits. Anything where people were expecting to spend a lot of time in your colony and eat you out of house and home. Essentially, it's the Psycast equivalent of saying, right, slapping your knees and standing up when you've got visitors in the UK. A nice way of letting them know it's time to leave. Just be aware that this makes your wealth graph look, well, really stupid if you use it multiple times over the lifespan of a colony. At level 5 you have Time Sphere, Time Quake and Time Reversal. Time Sphere lets you do some really weird things, rapidly aging whoever or whatever stands inside it, in the form of deteriorating objects and structures. If you get a raid that's waiting before assaulting you, or a siege that's going to take its sweet time setting up, a well-placed Time Sphere or two can kill the majority of them with heart complications before they even start to attack, by which point they'll likely have developed cataracts, or dementia, or a bad back. It's cruel, but damn is it effective. Timequake is very similar to Neuroquake, only instead of a map-wide berserk, you have a map-wide time sphere effect. Very dangerous on your own tile as it causes fairly substantial damage to practically every single part of your base. This rapid aging process is nothing if not effective for biological beings though, able to wipe an entire enemy settlement without firing a single bullet with strong enough size sensitivity, and if you can manage to stay safe long enough for the years to tick up. And finally, you have Time Reversal, which allows you to de-age friendly pawns 10 years and remove any age-related maladies, at the cost of aging the caster 5 years instead. This can obviously then be fixed by using the Age Psycast a few times on some of your fleshy batteries in the prison. The rinse repeat for an eternally young colony. Such a great theme with Chronocaster. This whole thing is a 10 out of 10 tree. If you absolutely want to burn the world down, Conflagrator is the path for you. Absolutely perfect for tribals living in a base made entirely of wood. As you would expect, this is a highly offensively focused tree that gets more damaging the higher you ascend. At level 1 you get your bog standard flame ball, which is very similar to a Molotov on demand, minus the fuel splashing on the ground when it lands. At level 2 you get self-explosion, making for a little more of an extreme self-defensive measure. The caster sets a huge area around themselves ablaze, likely taking a small hit of burn damage themselves in the process. This is a little bit of a Hail Mary if you happen to find yourself totally surrounded and alone, hopefully giving you the time to escape while enemies run around desperately trying to extinguish themselves. This is also a fantastic source of ignition if you want to start a really big fire due to the scale of the detonation. At level 3 you've got Explosion, Fire Shield and Breathe Flame. Explosion is a more controllable flame ball, exploding exactly where you want with a bigger radius, at the cost of slightly less range. Fire Shield is a must if you're going to charge into your own infernos, making your comfortable temperature in the thousands and setting your flammability to 0%, so you'll never be afflicted with heatstroke or even burned by superheated air. This allows you to use casts like Self-Explosion with zero risk to yourself, and makes anyone who attacks you in melee take some fire damage in retaliation. Breathe Flame is the final cast and it behaves similarly to an imp's genetic ability, Spew Fire, spreading flames out in a widening arc in front of the caster. Useful to push enemies back if they're starting to break through your defensive line. At level 4 you get Eye Blast, Extinguish Flames and Meteor Shower. Eye Blast combines the range of a flame ball with the precision and destruction of explosion, making for a deadly ability to snipe enemy backlines and keep gunners running around trying to put themselves out. Extinguish Flames is what I affectionately refer to as the Spaff ability. Your caster goes off like a fire foam popper and immediately puts out all fires around them in a huge radius. Highly useful once combat has finished to allow your colonist to grab downed enemies and stop any potential loot from burning, or to save an inferno building you've made in a cave network from totally burning to the ground, as you can repair and reset it instead to save resources. Meteor Shower is where the abilities start to get a bit more impactful. Dropping multiple chunks of burning debris from the atmosphere onto your enemies is a little extreme, especially when it's more likely to disrupt your own defences by providing them cover, or potentially denting your own walls. Personally, for the cost anyway, I'd say stick to using Eye Blasts. And with level 5 you get the really big guns, Fire Beam and Fire Tornado. Fire Beam will see a pillar of extreme heat descend from the heavens and absolutely annihilate a target area, with those closer to the epicenter taking monumental fire damage. This will cause your Psycaster to enter into a psychic coma, so you'll want to make it really count, especially useful against sieges once the enemies have dropped their mortar rounds. Fire Tornado is an absolutely terrible idea on your own tile, summoning a randomly moving, massively damaging Spire of Conflagration that ruins anything and everything it happens to come across. Barely even useful for assaulting an enemy base, as you'll likely ruin all potential loot that they had, or even worse, the wind will blow this the other way and kill half of your own forces. Empath is the next tree, and it features a lot of word ofs from vanilla Rimworld, designed to assist keeping the colony running smoothly. These can be boosted with the ability Group Link from the Archon tree, allowing multiple pawns to be impacted at once. This does mean you will need to learn the Group Link from the Archon tree on your Empath caster as well. At level 1 you get Word of Joy, which is the same as normal, granting a plus 30 mood boost at the cost of 20% consciousness. Really not that great unfortunately, and it is classed as a hostile action if you use it to try and cheer up a guest. They do not enjoy being pacified by having their brain turned into that of a toddler. With level 2 you have Word of Serenity, Word of Love and Word of Inspiration. Word of Serenity is fantastic to keep around if you have xenotypes that have particularly violent outbursts or mental breaks, allowing you to stop them in their tracks without needing to arrest them, which would further upset them. Word of Love is the same as usual. Without installing some other mods to fix it, as it were, this is also very specific about being cast on 2 different genders. Word of Inspiration is fantastic, allowing you to immediately grant a pawn a random inspiration. This is obviously the one that works the best with Group Link, allowing you to fully inspire your entire colony in a single cast. You will need to work fast to pull this off, however, as without any cost reduction you need 105% Psi Focus to cast the entire combo. So, Group Link, quick bit of meditation, inspiration, boom, whole colony is ready to do some work. At level 3 you can unlock Psychic Soothes for both male and female colonists. Whilst these buffs aren't anything mind-blowing, they do come at quite a high cost. It can be useful to have to counteract a Psychic Drone event, however. Moving up to level 4, you finally get some new abilities: Bliss, Mind Wipe and Energy Dump. Bliss is a staggered buff that works similarly to Word of Joy, minus the hostile action side of it, starting with a small mood buff and a consciousness debuff, eventually escalating into a more severe brain fuzz but an unparalleled sense of euphoria. Very handy for demanding visitors that don't do any work and constantly teeter on the verge of leaving. Mind Wipe is fantastic. The downside is supposed to be that this potentially lowers the target's learn skills and obviously does some faction relation damage, if they aren't openly hostile to you. But this ability is Recruit, Convert, and a social relations reset all in one. No more negative opinions towards your colony because they used to consider you an enemy. No time needed to slowly persuade them to join your side. Just an instant colonist whose skills get reset to what they'd have been at their base level, which honestly really isn't a downside. In some cases it actually buffs certain skills that they might have. Energy Dump is a bit of a weird one, but you can time it correctly and get a lot of use out of this in the right scenarios. It fully restores the target's energy bar and totally depletes the casters. This isn't adding what was left of the casters to the target, so both the caster and the target can be on 5% energy. It will still completely refresh the target at very minimal cost to the caster. Extremely useful if you're doing events on the world map, as you can keep someone working all day and night with this. The final cast at level 5 is Reunion Farskip, and this sure is an underwhelming one. If one of your pawns has a lot of family members that have been generated by caravans visiting, raids occurring, or world events, this will allow you to forcefully yank them onto your tile, whilst doing absolutely nothing to change what faction they belong to or the feelings they have towards you. So chances are you're just going to piss off a bunch of people and potentially get their family members killed. The one situation in which this is a highly useful skill is if some of your pawns have been captured during a raid. You have a prime moment after they've been taken to potentially cast this on one of your colonists to bring their family home, before the game decides if they've died during the capture, been ransomed, or converted to the enemy faction. Ooh, it's time to cover my favourite. Shout out to when I had a pawn that was incapable of violence, Wimpies, that racked up over 1000 kills using this path. Frostshaper. At level 1 you get Breathe Ice, Ice Spike, and Ice Shield. Breathe Ice works exactly the same as Breathe Fire, only at the opposite end of the temperature spectrum. Whereas Fire causes burns and ignites nearby targets, ice causes frostbite, inflicts hypothermia and hypothermic slowdown, and will leave a thick snow on the floor, which lowers movement. Normally, the hypothermia caused by these attacks falls off quickly enough not to matter, as most biomes are warm enough that they will naturally negate the debuff. The main benefit of frost damage over fire damage is that nothing has resistances to it. Armour can protect you from sharp, blunt, or heat. Nothing can protect you from the cold embrace of a Frostshaper. Ice Spike fires a sharp shard of ice towards the target, and since the rebalance patch for Psycast expanded, this is no longer a guaranteed hit. To make it more accurate and more damaging, increase the caster's psychic sensitivity. With only a few buffs to sensitivity, this level 1 cast is more than capable of taking off an entire limb. Ice Shield is the mirror of Fire Shield, preventing hypothermia from extreme cold conditions and causing hypothermic buildup in anyone who attacks them in melee. At level 2, you have the GOAT, Frost Ray and Ice Crystal. Frost Ray can, and will, murder entire raids by itself with the correct corridor setup. You just need to manage the heat accumulation from casting it and hope that the enemies stack up in time before the psi focus is gone. So what it's supposed to do is create a freezing ray that rapidly ticks for sharp damage against the target and slowly inflicts hypothermia related effects. However, its cooldown is short enough that you can cast another which also refreshes the duration of the first cast, and then another which refreshes the duration of the first and the second cast. So by the time you're onto your 4th use of this, you have 4 frost rays covering multiple angles of approach, ticking like crazy and absolutely murdering whatever happens to be stupid enough to try and walk through it. Is it intended to work this way? I'd imagine the answer's a resounding no, so use that feature as your own morals deem fair, or not. Ice Crystal is extremely useful for tribals, as it allows you to make a walk-in freezer and keep your food fresh, needing to be recast once every 5 days. Just be aware that as there is no option to regulate the temperature of the ice crystal, stacking these in an area will create an environment in the -100s of degrees Celsius, at which point hypothermia builds up at a rate of around 1% a second. For level 3, you have Cold Zone, Ice Block, and Snap Freeze. Cold Zone will allow a lot of your higher level casts to function as intended, creating a circle that will reach around -70 degrees or so, even outdoors. Raiders will quite happily stand and wait to attack as you plop one of these down on top of them. Caravans, however, are less inclined to hang about, and will leave the map because of a dangerous temperature. Ice Block spawns a large chunk of ice at the location to provide cover, box off an escape route, lock down a door, or whatever else you may need. The ice does quickly melt unless the temperature on the map is below freezing. This is where Cold Zone allows you to direct the conditions of your map and make sure that the block stays intact. Snap Freeze works similarly, only encasing pawns in that area in a block of ice, rather than summoning the ice as a structure. I'm not sure if this is currently working as intended or not, as even when cast inside of a Cold Zone, the ice block that pawns are encased in seems to stick around long enough for about 15 to 20% hypothermia. Whereas I'm sure I remember this basically lasting forever if it was cast over a Cold Zone previously. Either way, this is still very strong crowd control. At level 4 you get Ice Wall, which either locks enemies in with the caster or keeps them out, with the ice melting the same as an ice block cast if it isn't kept chilled with the Cold Zone. Nothing amazing, but it can entirely cut off an access point for enemies or remove their retreat option. With level 5 you get Blizzard, which used to be good until they got greedy and now it's all microtransactions and sexual harassment cases. It creates a devastating vortex of cold around the caster, with a small safe zone in the centre, before dropping them into a 5-day coma. This thing hits over walls, around obstructions, doesn't give a crap if the targets are friendly, neutral, or enemies. If you've got a high sensitivity Frostshaper, you can legitimately build your entire defensive structure around them. Small threats, corner camp with a Frost Ray. Big threat, make them run a maze and use this from the centre. It is ridiculously powerful. And to go from something so powerful to something so odd, we have the Harmonist. At level 1 you get Mind Control, Psychic Guidance, and Transmute Stone. Mind Control is pretty solid, While it doesn't have a massive range, the debuff honestly isn't that bad. Also, there isn't any negative consequences for casting this on friendlies or neutrals. If you see someone in a caravan carrying a gun you'd like, mind control them and just make them drop it. Also very useful for picking out raiders that have explosives, as you will have enough time to turn them around and make them fire it in the opposite direction that they had intended. Psychic Guidance is a huge debuff to the caster, but a massive buff to the receiver, either lowering or raising movement, manipulation, sight and hearing by 50%, depending on if they're casting the buff or gaining the buff. But this isn't limited to just one pawn. You can have your Harmonist buff multiple colonists with this. Sure, they'll be absolutely bollocksed, but it can turn your frontline into an absolute lawnmower. Transmute Stone is... this works on pretty much all stone. Place tiles, walls, natural rock floor, mountain, blocks sat in storage. It's, random? So it can be useful on a tile that only has limestone and slate. Keep them stockpiled away from anything else and cast it on top of them. Have a stockpile set somewhere else which holds granite and marble. If you happen to roll into either of them, your pawns will move them away and store them for later use. At level 2 you have Heat Focus and Luck Transfer. Heat Focus converts accumulated heat into Psi Focus, with the minor downside being that very few abilities in the Harmonist tree actually generate heat. Whilst it doesn't give a great amount of Psi Focus, it's very handy to instantly clear your heat bar, allowing you to drastically overcast with your capacity and clear out the accumulation in a few seconds. Luck Transfer is something I always cast the wrong way around. You want to hit the target that you're looking to buff first, and the debuff target second. The luck mentioned is basically becoming Fortune from Metal Gear Solid 2. The lucky target will always hit and be missed by every shot. The unlucky target will always miss and be hit by everything. Worth remembering that the lucky target can still be hit by missed shots that were aiming for something else, or AoE attacks. This isn't invulnerability. At level 3 you gain Bend Probability and Location Swap. I'd say that Bend Probability is probably one of the two standout casts in this entire path. It basically pokes the storyteller with a stick and forces something to happen. Positive, negative, kinda both. If you're sat waiting for an event to occur, this is your guy. Location Swap is... it's just kind of a worse skip. It lets the Harmonist more easily jump around to give people the guidance buff, and whilst you can use this to put people into compromising situations by exposing them to the full might of your warband, you'll have just done exactly the same to your Harmonist into theirs. At level 4 you gain Health Swap and Transmute. Health Swap is certainly a choice. Whatever injuries are on the first target can be transferred to the second, but this lets you do some really weird things, like putting 2 peg legs on the Harmonist, then target themselves and cast at an enemy. It immediately drops them to the ground with missing legs, whilst your Harmonist can awkwardly run away on their little pegs. I'm not quite sure I get how you're supposed to use this ability besides trolling visitors. It isn't an aggressive action. Transmute is where it's really at. The ability to roll the dice on any item or any stack of materials that you would like. Whilst you will never get something more valuable, you may get something more useful to you, and whilst I don't encourage gambling, if you are using a mod like Ogre Stack, this can have some absolutely ridiculous and hilarious results. Who doesn't want to turn a full stack of fine meals into a random charge rifle? And for level 5 you have the Ultimate Wet Fart. Skill roll. It says it's supposed to help rebalance a pawn's skills, and I quote, with beneficial guidance. I have only ever had it totally jank up my pawns and randomly reassign their learned levels and seemingly strip away points that they were passionate about? No, hard pass. I'm going to stick to turning these stacks of wood into something else, and maybe someday it'll be useful. Now we've moved into the one that really throws balance out of the window, as if any of the previously mentioned paths weren't strong enough. Now we have Necropath. At level 1, Necropaths simply get Word of Fear, useful to keep enemies staggered during the early game so you aren't overwhelmed if they turn up with more numbers than you. Moving on to level 2, you have Life Rot and Steel Vitality. Life Rot is an easy way to bring a pawn down quickly, or, if they don't care that much about pain, tie them up momentarily, inflicting them with small but incredibly painful rot wounds and potentially making them vomit as they leave piles of corpse bile underneath their own festering body. Steel Vitality doesn't need to be cast on an enemy, but chances are you'll want to, or at the very least a prisoner. Punishing the target with lowered speed, consciousness and a slower natural healing factor, and massively increasing the rate at which they grow tired, all whilst buffing these stats for the Necropath for a full 24 hours. Chances are if you're using Psycasts, you might already have a meat battery around for your Chronopath, so you might as well make sure their life is as miserable as possible by casting this on them too. At level 3, Necropaths unlock Paralysis Pulse, Corpse Talk and Ghost Walk. Paralysis Pulse is just broken. There kind of isn't another way of saying it. Applying Psychic Paralysis in an AoE around the caster, which will also take the caster down with it. With some minimal investment into Psychic Sensitivity, or the Hypersensitive trait, the AoE of this gets absolutely massive, allowing you to hit enemies over walls, capturing literal dozens of enemy raiders every time an attack happens, giving you a huge selection of potential candidates to join you, or numerous slaves to sell to the Empire, or thousands of silver worth in organs, meat and skin to trade, whatever you want. Corpse Talk compares the caster's skills to the chosen corpses, and buffs them to match if they were higher on the corpse. Think of it like getting a quick lesson in advanced techniques. Whilst it is a little niche in its uses, it does last for a full 15 days on the Necropath. So if you've got a big harvest coming in soon and want them to be able to help, you can always talk to a dead florist to learn how to pick heal route without botching it. Ghost Walk allows you to move through walls. Extremely useful for exploring through mountains, provided you have somewhere on the other side of it you can click to target the move. This better allows you to scout through a mountain for steel or component veins without needing to strip mine everything. If you're running Vanilla Expanded Ancients, this makes exploring a vault to see what they have an absolute breeze. Just remember, there may be turrets or landmines. If you do manage to get stuck in a wall whilst using this, fear not, you'll eventually pop back out on the nearest side, and hopefully you won't still be just as stuck as you were before. With level 4, you get a way to clear your map of corpses and provide a benefit to the caster, with Consume Bodies. Your Necropath will absorb the essence of all nearby corpses around them and gain a permanent stacking buff to their neural heat capacity. Part of me wishes that this was the level 1 ability, and that the body's consume tally in the health tab was used as a method of casting higher level Necropath skills, similar to how the Chronopath uses their own years to fuel abilities. At level 5, you get the real crazy shit. Enthrall, Death Shield, and Resurrect. Enthrall is what you'll want your high heat capacity for, as it costs very little psi focus but is best when cast multiple times in a row, turning corpses into skellies that serve you for 24 hours before crumbling. With no pain sensitivity and living in constant rage, they will fight your enemies until they're either smashed to bits or they've cleared the map of any potential threat. This is why you want enough heat capacity to stack multiple casts. Ideally, you'll have an army of these ready to throw out that can soak all the potential damage that may otherwise have gone into your melee line. Death Shield is a bit of a strange one. Yes, it prevents a pawn from dying for the next 24 hours, but you still can't fix a destroyed torso or replace a missing head. You're also most likely going to put this on a melee pawn and throw them into combat, thinking, aha, they can just keep rampaging now, but they're also going to fall over from the pain of this experience. So put a pain stopper on them and then you can have them ignore it. And they end up losing everything. Arms, legs, organs, shattered bones, missing eyes. Even if they didn't lose something vital, you can patch them up after the fight and replace their missing blood supply. The damage to their body is going to be catastrophic. Definitely a weird cast. Unless you want the person that you're putting it on to quite literally have the most painful death imaginable. But fear not, if you do happen to lose the head, torso, heart, both arms, both legs, and quite literally every other body part by using this, you could always just cast Resurrect. Functioning exactly like a Resurrector mech serum, this is an ability that I self-moderate not to use, as it makes death in Rimworld trivial. With the most recent patch to Psycast Expanded, it was slightly upped in severity, as the caster needs to lose a finger to use this Psycast. Previously, you could simply regrow it and replace it from another Psycasting tree, meaning eternal uses of Resurrect. Now the finger is marked as sacrificed, not lost. So even with a bionic or an Archotech arm installed on that side of the body, that digit is still rendered useless. Meaning that over time, a Necropath's manipulation will passively go down the toilet if you keep casting this. Is this still too powerful? I mean, I lean on the side of saying yes. It seems like something that should require a heap of bodies consumed to power, with a less perfect resurrection effect perhaps. Maybe the returned soul is no longer in perfect harmony with their body, or they're given a trait to better simulate the trauma of being dragged back to life by a dark sacrificial ritual. Onto something a little more plain Jane, Nightstalker. At level 1 you're given Dark Vision and Darkness. Dark Vision is what you would expect, with many xenotypes having this as a standard through their gene, allowing you to work and fight in the dark as if it were daylight. Darkness is a little more interesting, not only making the area inside the sphere it spawns totally dark, but also causing any projectiles that pass through the area to miss, which, as mentioned before, doesn't mean they won't hit anything. They may still miss and hit an unintended target. The wording on the effect also makes it seem like any melee attacks made within the zone will also miss. They won't. You can still very much be slapped around in melee inside the dark zone. On to level 2. You've got Obscure and Eclipse. Obscure plays very well with Eclipse, making any of your pawns in the surrounding AoE, that are also stood in darkness, turn invisible. As with most invisibility effects, attacking will break your cover, so if you want to use this effectively, make sure Fire at Will is turned off. Eclipse does as you'd expect, and triggers the Eclipse event to occur. Extremely useful if you're in a colony that appreciates darkness and needs to fight a raid in the middle of the day. No more UV sensitivity for you. At level 3 you have Shadow Skip and Decoy. Shadow Skip isn't just a rebranded skip, it has its own mechanic which makes it far more valuable in the right situations. There is no max distance on Shadow Skip, nor do you need a line of sight to the location, it simply needs to be in an area of darkness. This allows your Nightstalker to jump around the entire map as needed, with only minimal investment into some 3x3 rooms that have a door and a roof. Beautiful. Decoy summons a shadow clone of the caster that tries to bait enemies into attacking it, rather than your actual colonists. With a high heat cost but minimal psi focus needed, you'll likely struggle to maintain this ability for long enough to totally distract a raid. It will, however, work perfectly to allow you to reposition or fall back. On to level 4, and you have Shadow Focus and Intensify Shadows. Shadow Focus applies a buff to psychic sensitivity depending on how dark the area is that the caster is standing in. As such, it's very easy to get plus 100% sensitivity by standing in total darkness and casting this. This isn't even an expensive ability, so it really is easy to keep this up constantly during combat with your Nightstalker. Intensify Shadows turns darkness into pitch darkness, which can be identified by a longer, darker, looming shadow. I honestly don't see that much difference in pitch darkness to normal darkness though. Statistically, anyway, it just looks cooler to me. And finally at level 5 you get Assassinate and Nightstep. Assassinate really benefits from a high melee skill and a very slow, high impact weapon rather than a fast, normal damage one. It allows the caster to skip to a target that's in darkness, similar to Shadow Skip, and make melee attacks based on how high their psychic sensitivity is. So having Shadow Focus active before casting this is a must. After the attacks have been performed, you skip back to where you started, allowing you to attack in melee from the safety of your own base if you wanted to. Nightstep works the same as vanilla Far Skip, only requiring the cast to take place at night. This is an extremely useful utility cast for world exploration, allowing you to pod out to a location, fill your pockets with whatever goodies were at the site, and Nightstep back to your own colony, avoiding any need to caravan over the world map. Next we've got the Protector, one of the most useful psycasting paths to have in any colony. It's really simple too, just a solid addition. At level 1 you have Pain Block and Word of Healing. With both being relatively straightforward, Pain Block allows wimpy pawns to stand their ground a little bit longer, or not to fall over because of food poisoning. And Word of Healing helps the injured recover 300% faster, which can stack with other healing effects, like super fast wound healing from genes or preach health from your moral guide. Onto level 2, you've got Stabilize and Word of Immunity. Stabilize is invaluable in some situations, giving you just a little more time to bandage wounds by halting a pawn's bleed out timer. Perfect for when you've got someone with multiple small scratches that may take an age to dress. Word of Immunity is just like Word of Healing, only for immunity. With this on your side, it's almost impossible to lose colonists due to illness. The only chance of it happening comes from a lack of psi focus or a really nasty case of malaria or plague hitting far too many people at once. With level 3, you unlock Overshield and Focus. Overshield acts as a short-lived impenetrable shield belt effect, providing total immunity to ranged attacks against the affected pawn. Focus is an extremely useful, very cheap combat buff that helps both melee and ranged, buffing movement, sight, and hearing? Whilst not as powerful as some other boons, as this doesn't touch manipulation, it's extremely easy to spam across your entire colony, and does last long enough to see you through the majority of a fight. At level 4, you unlock Skip Shield, Invisibility, and Regrow Limbs. Skip Shield is the same as it was in vanilla, similar to a low shield pack, with the downside being it also blocks outgoing attacks as well as incoming ones, so you can't stand inside it and fire out in total safety. It is, however, very useful to throw in front of a person aiming a rocket launcher at your front line, so it'll explode right in their own face. Invisibility is a stronger version of other sources that offer similar effects, as it isn't broken by attacking or acting, allowing you to make a very deadly assassin with the right combination of casts. Just do your best to make sure that you've got the most damage possible done in its very limited duration. Regrow Limbs is a godsend of an ability, able to go from removing annoying scars that are lowering your manipulation or movement speed, to regenerating an entire leg. The regeneration process isn't fast, and it needs to individually regrow all parts of the limb. So if you're restoring an arm, it'll need to do the bones, shoulder, forearm, hand, and fingers, sometimes requiring a little bit of encouragement with a second cast to speed up the process, as Regrow Limbs appears to throw an additional +1 health on a limb every so often, meaning that if a missing part says it'll take 24 hours to regrow, it'll actually be done faster if Regrow Limbs is present on the pawn as a buff. This also means if you cast Regrow Limbs on a pawn that is heavily wounded and missing, say, a hand, it'll first help stitch up the wounds on the other body parts before it begins work in restoring the missing limb. And finally, at level 5 you have Guardian Skip Barrier, which does allow your pawns to shoot back out of its protective field. The caster will constantly generate heat while trying to maintain this effect, so you won't have long to work with it. It also covers a large area, so you need to make sure that enemies don't simply enter the barrier and fire at you from underneath the protective dome. This also only works on ground level projectiles, so don't go getting cocky and trying to pop this at the right time to stop a mortar shell. Skipmaster has a lot of vanilla casts in its path, so should be quite familiar if you've used casting in Royalty. At level 1 you've got Solar Pinhole. Nothing special, just a nice straightforward cast that can either provide light to aid with combat or work speed, or if needed, heat a room during a particularly nasty cold snap. Multiple pinholes means more heat, so ideally don't cast them in your freezer. At level 2 you have Chunk Skip and Water Skip. Whilst technically Skip is also at this tier, you need to have unlocked a level 3 ability to unlock it. Chunk Skip is the same as always. It scatters some random chunks around to either move cover so enemies get left exposed, or to better position them for an angle of attack when you're trying to defend. Water Skip, again, remains unchanged. A quick emergency extinguisher option that also prevents the tiles it leaves water on from burning again. It scales well with sensitivity, so at higher levels you can bathe entire rooms in a single cast, or use it to create yourself an emergency fire block to stop the nearby forest fire from spreading to your crops. As Skip is at this level, we will cover it. Skip is a little different from vanilla. Whereas in vanilla, the range of the skip was determined by the location of the target that you were trying to skip, now you can only skip them in the original range around the caster. It basically stops you leapfrogging pawns around the map or around corners.
I'll just put this over here with the rest of the fire.
One of the most massively overlooked uses of skip is being able to steal loot right out from underneath your enemy's noses, as you can skip items as well as pawns and animals. If you want something that's sitting out surrounded by turrets and nasty shit, skip it straight back to your own feet. The same goes for certain weapons during raids. You can grab that dropped Doomsday rocket launcher and immediately turn it around and use it to your own advantage. Just don't try and skip grenades that have been thrown. Turns out these actually aren't objects. At level 3 you unlock Chaos Skip. This is what lets you unlock Skip at level 2. As such, Chaos Skip is a worse version of Skip. You get to select the target, but you have no control over the destination. Useful if your only other option in that situation may be die, but far too random to use regularly. At level 4, you have Wall Raise, Smoke Pop, and Mass Chaos Skip. Wall Raise is unchanged from vanilla. Quick, simple cover at your fingertips. Either to block corridors, give you a second to breathe, cut off an escape route, force enemies to walk into a minefield. It has a lot of uses, it just isn't very flashy. Smoke Pop is another one that remains unchanged, and I always forget it has the ability to entirely stop turrets locking onto you. Just like the utility item, only with the option of where to cast it within range. Smoke Pop ruins the accuracy of any shot passing through it, and entirely negates a turret's offensive capability. And Mass Chaos Skip. It's exactly what it sounds like. If Chaos Skip wasn't unpredictable enough, why not do it to a lot of targets instead?
I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
Almost certain to put an enemy in a far more dangerous position than where they were originally, this is only for the truly suicidal. At level 5 you have Skip Door and Far Skip. Skip Door is finally something new, and you might need a couple of additional mods to add the functionality to it that you'd have expected upon reading its description. It basically allows you to construct a teleportation network across your own colony, and add sites on the world map to it, whilst you're there at least. The main thing to remember is not to teleport away from a site if it would leave absolutely nobody at it, as that makes it count as if you've fled from the mission and will delete the location entirely. What this does allow you to do is send a single pawn out to a location, place a skip door, then bring as many pawns over as you feel you will require to complete the encounter, and then you can return when you feel like it. Every skip door you're maintaining is also going to put some strain on the pawn's neural heat, constantly, costing 50 heat per maintained door. Pawns will not use skip doors to transport goods or to travel around your home tile faster without additional mods, and even then, the mods that let you do this are a little finicky at times. Skip doors are much better suited to be a conscious choice on your part as to how and when to use them, a right-click command basically, allowing you to travel to the front lines from your base quickly, to get behind raids if required, or in the previously mentioned way to avoid having to send a large amount of your colony out in a caravan to go and complete a world event. A word of warning, skip doors that are not willingly destroyed are like a bomb going off. If the caster who is maintaining all of your skip doors dies, you'll damn sure know about it. Far Skip, the final ability, remains unchanged from vanilla. It's a great way to get around the world map when paired with pod launchers. You can even cast it from the world map UI, allowing you to caravan when leaving a site to more easily scoop up the loot before instantly reappearing at your base. One of my favourite abilities. The Staticlord is the last of the elemental casters, and it is a very strong offering. At level 1 you have Bolt, which is nothing too impressive. Just a small AoE lightning blast thrown at an enemy that has the added bonus of inflicting EMP damage, giving you an easy answer to mechs. This also potentially sets targets on fire if it lands a direct hit. At level 2 you have Thunderbolt, Chainbolt and Static Aura. Thunderbolt summons a rather dramatic lightning strike that deals damage and ignites the centre of the affected area, with an outwards pulse that does a large amount of EMP damage. Chain Bolt is where Staticlord starts to get a little silly, as the effect can bounce down an entire raid conga line, shattering shields, stunning enemies and starting fires. It's the pinnacle of disruption. Just be careful not to have burning enemies scattering behind your lines as they try and run to put themselves out. Static Aura turns your pawn into that kid who spent the entire time at the party rubbing a balloon against their hair, allowing you to zap anything remotely hostile that you approach, or that approaches you, dealing the usual mix of damage with some EMP effect thrown in for good measure. At level 3, you gain access to Ball Lightning, Recharge, and Static Pulse. Ball Lightning is one of the strongest options you will have if you use a long corridor to funnel raiders towards your defensive line, as it creates a travelling ball of electricity that arcs to targets as it passes them, before dispersing when it reaches its target destination. As such, it is better to overshoot with this ability, so it's active for longer, rather than aiming for the middle of a raid when it could have carried on passing through it, dealing more damage. Recharge's tooltip reads kind of badly to me. It makes it sound more like it will only be able to charge for 100 watt days, and the length of time is the bit that will scale. In actuality, you're charging a battery at a rate of 100 watt days per second, and the duration is how long you can maintain the cast. As standard, a 100% sensitivity pawn will be able to fully charge a basic vanilla battery. Useful if you're running a base purely on renewables and you happen to get an eclipse, if the wind also decides to totally die down for a day or so. Static Pulse looks dangerous, but is mostly harmless, sending out an absolutely massive EMP shockwave around the caster that otherwise does nothing. Looks really cool though. At level 4, you can unlock Vortex, which is another ability with an absolutely massive AoE, but somewhat limited effect. The epicenter of this is where there will be the most severe manipulation and movement speed penalties, that scales down towards the outer edges of the cast. This means that this is most useful when you know enemies will have to travel through the center and they cannot simply go around it. The main issue then becomes, this ability ruins your visibility. Like, seriously, you can't see shit while this thing's active. And finally, at level 5, you unlock Hurricane and Flash Storm. If you cast Hurricane and think it hasn't done anything, despite the graphics and the weather looking like it's still active, that'll be because you instantly hit your neural heat limit and it takes a second or two for the weather to change back to normal. The idea of Hurricane is to channel a severe storm that has a huge impact on movement speed, manipulation and sight, pushing them all down to just 30%. To achieve it in any meaningful way, you're going to either need an absolutely massive neural heat capacity, or you're going to cause the pawn to have a complete and total psychic breakdown by going well above their limits with an overclock. This might need a little bit of tuning to make it more channelable, if that's even a word. The last ability, Flash Storm, is a beefed up version of the vanilla cast, by the looks of it, striking more often and more reliably. A localized storm at your fingertips. I only wish it was slightly more effective. The level 5 abilities on the other offensive psycasting trees are utterly devastating compared to this. Honestly, Chain Bolt and Ball Lightning spam will do far more damage than even stacking a bunch of Flash Storms will. Time for the path that feels like it got the most significant rebalance with the update to Psycast Expanded, the Technomancer. To start, at level 1 you have Enchant Quality or Mend. Enchant Quality used to go up to Excellent, which was ridiculous. It now caps out at raising an item's quality to Good. This comes in most useful when traders bring in awful or poor quality gear or structures that would actually be very useful to you otherwise, allowing you to top them up to something a little better. Notice that I said structures too. If you uninstall items, you can boost their quality while they're in their minified form. Very useful for any artwork, beds, comfy chairs, or recreation choices. Just be careful about using this on everything that you come across, as it's quite easy to inflate your colony wealth using it. Mend, as you'd expect, restores the durability of an item, meaning with a Technomancer you never need to throw out ratty gear ever again. One thing you may notice about these abilities is that they do lend themselves to quite a lot of micromanagement to ensure that you aren't wasting psi focus, as it were, by sitting on a full bar for multiple days. Whilst I do like the Technomancer, it definitely becomes a bit of a daily ritual. Wake up, meditate, draft, send them to the crafting room, rinse, repeat. At level 2, Technomancers get Conjure Heat Pearls, Haywire, and Power. Conjure Heat Pearls is very specific in both its usage and its application. First, you'll need to gain some heat on your Technomancer, which likely means you'll need enough psi power to cast both a heat generating spell and conjure pearls. Once you've dumped the heat into conjuring the pearls, they can now be equipped like a utility item. During combat, you can throw these pearls at enemy Psycasters to completely flood their heat bar to 100%, likely preventing them from casting. The main issue with this is that you really don't want to be close enough to an enemy Psycaster to throw one of these things at them. You certainly don't want to be sat around twiddling your thumbs like a dipshit waiting for it to go off. Neat idea, far too niche to actually use. Haywire is another skill with a very niche use, but you'll actually find applications for this far more frequently, swapping the allegiance of enemy defensive turrets and making them aid you instead for a limited time. Very beneficial with certain modded turrets many of the factions introduce. Even if there are no enemies left for the turret to attack, this allows you to destroy it more easily without being fired upon. Power is a really simple Psycast, allowing a Technomancer to provide power to any structure they desire for a couple of days or so, really useful for things like deep drills. For level 3, they gain Rock and Steel Constructs. Rock Constructs work as basic cleaners and haulers, created by casting the ability on a simple rock chunk, and maintained by sacrificing 20 of the caster's heat as long as they remain active in the colony. If the link is broken, the construct returns to a chunk. The heat reserved by these skills doesn't count towards being able to conjure heat pearls either. Steel Construct works in a very similar way, casting on a chunk of slag instead, which creates a more combat-oriented helper for the colony that can also be drafted for defensive operations. At level 4, Craft Psi-Ring and Word of Progress are the abilities. Craft Psi-Ring requires an LTEX chunk as a target and has some very unique interactions. The caster who forges the ring using this ability can pass some of their own knowledge onto it, allowing other casters that wear the ring to cast the chosen ability. Now, you used to be able to make a ring of Craft Psi-Ring, which would mean anyone that wore the ring of Craft Psi-Ring could then craft a Psi-Ring of all of the abilities they knew. Basically, it was a whole thing that's now been patched out, so don't go thinking you've got some fancy ideas. The hardest bit is getting the abilities that you actually want to make a ring with on your Technomancer. So you might want them to be the ones using all the Psi trainers, learning abilities outside of their primary tree. Generally speaking, it's very useful to have rings for some of the protector skills, like immunity, healing, regrow limbs, as it lets you pass the ring back and forth between your casters and get multiple uses off, sharing the Psi focus cost burden across the entire colony. Word of Progress is a huge buff to research speed and intellectual gain, doubling both for 5 days. Something simple to cast on your head researcher at all times, so preferably your Technomancer isn't the lead researcher, as they can't cast this on themselves. And finally, for level 5, you have Reverse Engineer. If you find an item, let's say Cataphract armor, and you really want to be able to make it for everyone, but you're missing all of the prerequisite and you don't have the tech prints, fear not. Reverse Engineer destroys the item but unlocks all of its secrets, immediately finishing the associated research to create them yourself. You will still be missing the prerequisite research, however, so you may not have the bench to even build it, but this can save you a lot of time and leapfrog your colony ahead rather dramatically in technology. It is worth remembering what certain technologies actually unlock, as reverse engineering something like EMP grenades actually gets you the hugely useful microelectronics. Similarly, if you have a pawn with a bionic ear or tongue, you can always remove it and reverse engineer it to gain access to the far more useful arms, legs, eyes and spine production. The final tree, we're nearly home. Warlord time. Warlord is a little tricky as it's split between both melee and ranged, so taking the full tree on one pawn is normally overkill, if you'll excuse the phrasing. At level 1, you've got Speed Boost, which is an absolutely huge 300% boost that lasts for hours. Even if you aren't in combat, this ability is amazing, allowing the pawn to get to work faster or haul much more efficiently. For level 2, you have Blade Focus, Power Leap and Firing Focus. This is where the tree starts to pick a side, as it were. Blade Focus will let you double melee attack speed, so now you're moving 3 times faster and swinging twice as quickly. And we're not even done yet.
Stop! He's already dead!
Power Leap allows you to bypass enemies if you've put yourself in a bad position, jumping over blocked pathways or more easily evading them by bounding over an entire river. Firing Focus is your ranged option, lowering ranged attack cooldown by 80%, which is the reload time after taking a shot. So, if you have a pawn with trigger happy, they get a drastically lower aiming and cooldown time. At level 3, you have Adrenaline Rush. This benefits both ranged and melee. Whilst it's one of the shorter buffs that Warlord can unlock, it increases sight, hearing, and movement to 150% and gives total pain immunity. So that's 150% base movement with the speed boost adding 300% on top. You're looking at a move speed over 20 by this point, not counting any slowdown from armor, weapons, or genetics. Level 4 splits again, giving you the abilities Controlled Frenzy, Guided Shot, and Beckon. Controlled Frenzy doubles the damage with all weapons, and even though you may not expect it to, this works with ranged weapons too. Every kill while made under the effect of this ability will reduce heat accumulation by 10 and reset the duration of this buff, so you want to make sure this is on when you start your snowball effect of applying Warlord buffs. Guided Shot is an absolute monster, doubling the range of your weapons and guaranteeing every shot will hit. Guided Shot does not last for a long time, and for damn good reason. This thing will even ensure that a minigun lands every single bullet on its target. And from all of the bombastic nonsense to Beckon? This can be used to force a target to move closer to you. Yes, this does have its uses, but this far up the tree? Against silly nonsense like bullets that don't miss and double damage? And finally for level 5 you have Kill Skip and Mass Beckon. Kill Skip needs to be very carefully managed, as unlike Assassinate from the Nightstalker tree, this actually teleports you to the target and leaves you there, with the bonus being that if you kill somebody with Kill Skip, it immediately casts again on the next target for free, and again, and again, and again, and again, until something manages to survive the attack. Obviously you want your full stack of buffs before casting this. Double damage, high manipulation and sight for accuracy. You want the slowest, hardest hitting, meanest bastard of a melee weapon you've got. The gene for strong melee damage is essential for this ability, and ideally you need to be able to split a torso in half with a single swing to try and ensure that this skill repeats a dozen or so times and runs down an entire raid, leaving just a trail of corpses. Just be a little careful, as enemies will take a swing or two at you as this ability lands you right next to them. It may end up putting you somewhere that you'd really rather not be. Mass Beckon is about what you'd expect. The same effect as Beckon, only now it's got an AoE. What an ability to end on, hey? Whoopee! And that, thank God, is that. All of your Psycasts, all of the new mechanics, all of the reasons to moderate yourself a little bit when using this mod so you don't end up absolutely destroying the difficulty curve of the game for yourself. On the topic of that, and bearing in mind how obviously powerful Psycast Expanded is, a final and important point to make about modding the game. I saw a Reddit thread a while back. Someone had posted saying they felt like the game was getting stale, that everything was too easy, and they were asking for suggestions about their mod list, having also included said mod list so people knew what they already had installed. Every single mod this person had downloaded was player power or advantage in some form, less micromanagement, better AI in the colony, easier storage and stacking, better armor, utilities, defenses, materials, psycasting, extremely powerful gene packs. Whilst I obviously want to encourage players to have fun with mods and try them out, you do also need to rebalance the game for yourself somewhat, otherwise you will rapidly find it becomes samey, dull, boring, Some people just don't want to be challenged when playing on the Rim, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're adding these mods and finding that the game is losing its spark for you, then adding more mods to try and compensate and digging yourself deeper and deeper into this power creep hole, you do well to remember what made most of us fall in love with this game in the first place. And that was that it was bullshit. It was unfair. It was nonsense. It gave us stories about losing an entire colony to guinea pigs, all the time that we had to eat Frank to survive the winter. Psycast Expanded is a mod I would advise extreme caution with. You're going to want to put it on and immediately try and make the most broken, ridiculous porn you possibly can. You're going to want to test out all of the stupid abilities, mash them together, see how well they combo, and make disgustingly powerful kill boxes that not even mechs can make their way through. And then a few colonies down the line, that's the routine. An exasperated sigh of, I guess I'll take Frostshaper again, because with cold hard logic, it's the right thing, the most powerful thing, and the easiest thing to do. So all of that is to say, if you're going to give yourself this much power, either beef up the raids that come your way with things like Alpha Mechs or Void, maybe play with a storyteller that's designed to be more active like Liara Livid or Ultimate, or just crank the difficulty up a step. When I first started streaming Rimworld, I was genuinely struggling on Strive to Survive, but by the time I'd done my last colony, I was on Losing His Fun with all kinds of ridiculous threats that I'd need to face down. It made the 2,000 hours that I put into this game remain engaging, and still give me those moments that made me laugh and smile. It's why I'm so careful in recommending this mod. I do recommend it, with the caveat of following 3 golden rules. 1. Passive XP gain needs to be as low as possible. 2. Try and limit your Psycasters to only picking up abilities from one tree. 3. Psycasters should take a tree that is relevant to their passions and their backstory. Try it out, see what you think. By all means, tell me I'm wrong. All of these are absolutely fine. As long as you're enjoying this mod, that's all that really matters. Just don't let it spoil your long-term experience by taking the fun of actually playing the game away and removing interaction with the systems that you are intended to play with. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods that you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments. I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.